Okay, so basically, I was planning to do like all of agriculture, but then afterwards, when like I was researching more about it, like I found out that like agriculture actually has like a lot of problems. So I'm just going to specialize on meat, and maybe in the future I'll do farming section. So problems with agriculture, meat industry. So nowadays we see meat everywhere. It's advertised everywhere. Like most fast food restaurants, etc., when they advertise about their food, it's usually meat. So like KFC, sandwiches, hot dogs, burgers, like McDonald's, bacon, like steaks, stuff like that. Like meat is everywhere, and we consume a whole ton of it. So this is what we sometimes view the meat industry as. Like we think that like these animals are kind of just like freely moving around, grazing as they please. Like everything's happy, but no, it's not. This is what the meat industry is actually like. Animals are really closely packed together. They're usually like very sick. They live on a whole ton of antibiotics, foods that they shouldn't eat, and like all this other bad stuff. And so basically, in the top pictures, you could see like chickens and pigs being put together, and they're basically just there, kind of walking around in their own filth. And below that is a cattle feeding lot. So basically, this is where they take the cattle to go and eat things. And like you can see that the ground below them is really black. It's because when you basically have a whole ton of cows in like a feeding lot, the cows will completely trample all of the grass and everything, and the land will be completely destroyed afterwards. The final picture is a slaughterhouse. So yeah. So what's wrong with meat? So for one, there's like a gigantic overconsumption of meat. We eat way more than we are supposed to. Although people say that we need meat for protein, that's not necessarily true, because you can get protein from almost anything, like tofu, vegetables, peanuts, stuff like that. It's not very efficient because we're basically giving large amounts of crops to feed animals, and these are crops which we can feed humans with. So basically, we're taking all of these, all these crops to feed these animals, and obviously not 100% of that crop will become meat, right? Most of it will actually become poop. So it's not efficient at all. Another issue is health issues. Recently, you might have heard that red meat is actually linked to cancer, cardiovascular disease, stuff like that. Red meat, like fun fact, red meat is actually more harmful for you than cigarettes because they are linked to heart attack, stroke, cancer, things like that. Fourth, there are ethical issues because we are basically raising these animals for slaughter. So people who raise these animals aren't going to be like focused on treating them well. They're going to be focused on like just like moving the animals around, like kicking them if they want to. They just want the animals to die so then they could feed people. There's environmental issues. Like, although we've heard about ethical and health issues, you might have not heard about like environmental issues, because cows are actually a gigantic producer of methane gas, and they're like a huge contributor to global warming. And also, when we basically take cows and pigs to like feedlots, they'll completely destroy the ground. Also, water, land, and food must all be sacrificed in order to produce meat. So, like, these can all be used to help humans, but instead, we're using like this water, food, and land to raise animals so we can eat them for our enjoyment. So meat's inefficiency. 50% of the water in the US is actually used for the meat industry. It takes 24,000 gallons of water to produce 1 pound of meat. So essentially, basically, by not eating 1 pound of meat, you'd actually save more water than not showering for 6 months, which is pretty insane. Also, around 70% of the US's grains and cereals are used to feed our cattle and other animals that are used for slaughter. And this is all like grains and like crops that we could use to feed humans, but instead we're using it to feed meat. So meat is incredibly inefficient. Also, animals raised for food around the world produce 89,000 pounds of excrement every second. That's a lot of food. And although some farmers try to utilize this excrement for their agriculture, like putting it in their fields and stuff, most farmers actually prefer to use chemical fertilizers to spray in their fields. So instead, all of this waste is just dumped elsewhere, so it pollutes our water, etc. And we feed cattle 4 times more protein than what they actually give us. So, like I said before, meat actually isn't the greatest contributor of protein in our diets. And also, the U.S. can apparently feed 800 million people with the grain that they feed cattle annually. So it's not inefficient. It's like completely inefficient. So land use and greenhouse gases. Obviously, there's going to be land use when we're raising animals. Like you can't just stack cows on top of each other. They're going to be taking up a lot of land. And also, since we humans right now are eating a lot of animals, and there's a lot of us humans in the world, there's probably going to be more animals. And since these animals are larger than us, they're going to be taking up more space. So raising animals for food actually takes up 30% of the world's land mass. That's 17,000 total square miles, and that's actually larger than the moon. Much of the prairies in central Canada have actually been lost to agriculture. So only 24% of mixed prairie, 30% of fescue prairie, 20% of aspen parkland, and 1% of tall grass prairie actually remain in a natural, undisturbed environment. So that's actually a pretty sad statistic in my opinion. Also, the meat industry is one of the largest contributors of greenhouse gases. Forests are cut down for more space, livestock generate massive amounts of manure and methane. Also, massive amounts of energy are required to produce chemical fertilizers for food crops, power slaughterhouses, and pump water for animals to drink. So basically, we are creating all this greenhouse gas by raising animals, and then we cut down trees to raise more animals, and then the trees, which could have actually probably reduced some of this carbon emission, aren't there anymore. So alternatives. Well, here are some of the alternatives to eating meat. So one of the first alternatives, kangaroo meat. Yes, I know it sounds odd, but for like a long period of time, scientists actually nurtured the belief that we can raise kangaroos for meat. Why? Because kangaroos and cows actually eat a lot of the same foods. Kangaroo meat contains more protein than beef. Cows produce a very, very, very large quantity of methane from their burps, and it's believed that kangaroos don't produce any methane at all. It has been believed that kangaroos, new studies have actually shown that kangaroo farts contain methane, so instead of burps, it comes out from the other end. But it still contains much, much, much less methane than what cows produce. Because of several factors such as necessary and specific climate conditions needed to raise meaty kangaroos, you can't just raise them everywhere. Apparently, the only place where you could really raise meaty kangaroos is like Australia. So like the article I was reading was just, if you ever stop by Australia, why not eat a juicy kangaroo steak? So the second option is in vitro meat, which is also called schmeat. So basically, in vitro meat isn't actually kind of meat, but it is at the same time. It's kind of just like stem cell technology. They take a few cells from like the neck of a cow or something, and then they'll make that cell like repeatedly grow and grow until actually and then they repeat this process over and over until you eventually end up with like small kind of hamburger patty thing. I don't know, I don't really like this option, and it's also pretty new and expensive, so I don't think we'll be really seeing this option for a really long time. Third option is one that a lot of people are already using. It's vegan and or vegetarian options. So they're actually quite common nowadays. You see vegetarian/vegan options everywhere. And the belief that vegetarians don't get enough protein is actually wrong, because like I said before, you can get protein out of almost anything. The recommended daily allowance for the general population is only actually 0.8 grams per 1 kilogram of body weight. So that isn't a whole lot. So also, what are some of the benefits of eating vegetables? Well, one, for starters, you get a smaller chance of disease. Because, like I said before, the animals are basically bred and kept in very close and cramped quarters. So they'll usually be, like, breeding disease and stuff. And then when we eat their meat, there's a very large chance that we will get sick. There's also less weight gain because meat contains a lot of fats, whereas vegetables don't. It's proven that you live longer. Also, there's more calcium in vegetables, so you get stronger bones. Your immune system is strengthened, and there's more antioxidants and more fiber in vegetables. Vegetables are cheaper, which is also a plus. So if you're ever going to university or something and you don't have much money, vegetables. So also vegetables, producing them, they're like, you produce less pollution. There's more, you get more nutrition and more energy from vegetables, and there's less pollution and famine caused. Fourth one, insects. So probably a lot of people don't like this idea. However, insects are one of the most viable options to replace meat consumption. Insects are already consumed in many countries, especially in Asia, and are often considered delicacies. I think last summer when I went back to China, I actually ate fried bees or something. It wasn't that bad. It's estimated by 2050, insects will definitely be a common part of our diet. Insects and insect bits are already commonly found in the foods that we eat. So like all the processed foods like tomato soup, peanut butter, things, apple juice, things like that, they'll actually contain insect bits. Because although like when you see produce on like shelves and stuff, they're taking the like good apples, good tomatoes, good produce because they want people to buy it, right? But then they'll take all the bad produce and then they'll just like mash it up, grind it up, turn it into like soup and like juice and stuff like that, and then you'll never know, right? So like the requirements for produce to be turned into these products is actually like really low. Like you could have apparently I think 2 flies, a couple larvae, 3 eggs or something like that in your produce, and you could still like grind it up and turn it into soup. Also, but why should we integrate insects into our diet? Well, insects can be bred quickly and efficiently, and also more meat can be like produced with less feed. So normally, I think with chicken, you can get 3 kilograms of chicken with 10 kilograms of feed. But with locusts, you can actually get 9 kilograms of locusts for 10 kilograms of feed. So it's much more efficient. Also, less space is needed to breed and raise insects. Like I said before, cows and sheep, they're bigger than us, so obviously they'll be taking up more space. Whereas insects, they're like yay big. So like we could pack more of them into tighter spaces, and then we could just raise them for food. Also, as the world population increases and people get wealthier, we will have less meat to feed everyone. So insects will be an alternative which can solve this problem. So apparently, right now we have 7 billion people in the world. Apparently by 2050, it will actually raise by 1/3. So there will obviously be many consequences of having a world population that high. So we won't be able to raise nearly enough meat to feed all those people. Also, pigs share diseases with us, such as swine flu, whereas most insects bred for food do not. Because like our anatomy with pigs are actually very, very, very similar. Like we can apparently even like get organs from like transplanted to us from pigs. So like when pigs breed together and like get diseases and we eat their meat, like there can potentially be outbreaks of like diseases and stuff. I think there was classic swine fever in Norway a couple of years ago. This concludes my presentation.
You guys have any comments?
Good job, Dave.
Hi. actually, I wanna ask some stuff. Actually, the thing Steve said about kangaroos and stuff, I actually read a book about it. It said apparently no kangaroos in Australia, right? And Australia is actually one of the biggest exports of beef, like meat agriculture to America. But actually, agriculture is really, really damaging to Australia because it's a really fragile environment, and they have their forests have really low regrowth rate. So once they cut the forest down, it's really hard for it to regrow. So people are asking, oh, why not? The author was asking, why not have Americans eat kangaroo meat? The reason is because Americans, including us, think that kangaroos are cute. So we don't eat kangaroo meat. And then we're saying, oh, kangaroos, some species are in extinction, so they're in danger. We can't eat kangaroos. But actually, a lot of kangaroos are pests in Australia. So that's the problem. And also insects, I eat them before. I think it's pretty good. And I think one of the biggest thing about us not eating insects is our values. Like, we have different values. Like, our value doesn't let us. We think that insects are disgusting, but like from the same book I have read, from the Class of Society, it was a really interesting book. From 900 to 1300, the Vikings, they settled in Greenland, but they died after 450 years. All of the population died because while the Inuits survived. The reason was because they didn't want to learn from the Inuits. They didn't want to adapt their technology because they thought the Inuits were pagans. They were inferior to the white race, so they couldn't change their values. So that's why they perished. Often perished in Greenland. Yeah, I'm not saying if we don't eat insects, we're going to. I'm just saying sometimes we have to change our values and we have to adapt to certain things.
Cool.